You and Ina ended up moving out to Texas.
Yes.
To both go into this 4-story library of Johnson's, and also you spent time in a tent trying to figure out what a Texas night is like. Can you tell us about some of the reporting?
Just a sleeping bag.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Tell us about just the initial, how you approached that kind of reporting. That's a huge building, and there are many people still living at that time, I guess, who worked with Johnson when you first began.
Yeah, the great thing was, he had died so young. He died in 1973, and I was starting this book in 76. So the people who grew up with Johnson, if you went to Johnson City, which is and you say his best friend was Truman Fawcett. Truman Fawcett lived on the other side of the courthouse square. Truman Fawcett was still living on the other side of the courthouse square. If you say Lyndon Johnson's first girlfriend was Kitty Clyde Ross, well, now she was Kitty Clyde Leonard, but she was still living in Johnson City. So the people he went to college with were his own. You could interview all of them, just about. They were all the people who were his first political machine. So you were able to interview all these people. So what I was doing, I said there were already 7 Johnson biographies had been published, and there were a lot on his youth. So I thought everything, that was basically done. I didn't think they had enough color in it, but I would add to that by interviews. So what I would do is every day, I'd work in the library from 9 to 5. That's when it closed.
The Johnson Library.
And I'm sorry, I would work in the Johnson Library from 9 to 5. And then I'd drive out into the hill country to interview one of these people. And I came to realize that there was something that they weren't telling me, over and over again. They're very different kind of people from North. There's a real kind of honesty there, but a reverence for government. They weren't going to say anything bad about a president of the United States. And they had seen reporters come, they called them portable journalists. I mean, ever since Johnson's presidency, these reporters would come down for a week and go back and write the true story of the hill country or the true story of Lyndon Johnson. So I finally said to Ina, I'm not getting through to these people. I don't understand them, and I don't understand the hill country, so I don't understand Lyndon Johnson. So I said, we're going to have to, how do you feel about moving there?
we're gonna have to, how do you feel about,
So Ina said, why don't you do a biography of Napoleon? But of course, she said yes, and we rented a house, and for 3 years, we were probably there 8 or 9 or 10 months of each year. And as soon as the people, this is what's so interesting, I mean, there's no difference between really doing a thorough reporting job, whether it's for a newspaper or a book. As soon as the people realized that we were living there, that we had come to stay to try and understand them, the interviews became different instantly. And they started to tell me all the stories about Lyndon Johnson, terrible stories about his ruthlessness when he was young and all. And then you came to understand that the hill country was a big part of him. I was a city boy, And they tried to explain to me, say, I remember his cousin Ava, his favorite cousin, who I became great friends with, saying to me, you're a city boy. You don't understand the land. And if you don't understand the land, you're never going to understand Lyndon Johnson. Well, I thought that was like some grade B Western. I said, this is really terrible. But then she said, I'll show you what I mean. So she took me out to the Johnson Ranch. And those of you who've read the book know that the central thing in Johnson's life was that his father, who he idolized, went broke and lost the Johnson Ranch. And the reason he went broke was he thought that the ranch could support a certain amount of mortgage because it would grow a certain amount of cotton. He didn't understand that there was what the land was like. And she took me out there and she said, now get out of the car and kneel down and put your fingers in the ground. And if you walked out, this grass was growing and it looked like ordinary. But when you stuck your fingers in the ground, they wouldn't even go down to the end of your finger because there was almost no soil there. It's rock underneath. So what that meant was one crop of cotton, and you couldn't grow, basically, I'm oversimplifying, you couldn't grow anymore. She said, you see, you can't make a mistake here. This isn't like a city where there's safety nets and things. Out here, if you make a mistake, you lose your home. And I suddenly thought about Lyndon Johnson, how he was the greatest vote counter in the Senate. You know, if you go down to the Johnson Library, one of the fascinating things you see is the very tally sheets in the Senate when he was majority leader. And they're long, those of you who have seen them, they're long, thin pieces of paper with 96 and then 100 named down the center. And on each side, there's a blank line, so you can write the number of check mark on which side they're going to be on a bill. When you look at these tally sheets, they're smudged. The pencils marks are smudged. And the reason they're smudged, I find out, is that Lyndon Johnson would go down these sheets. That was his thumb mark. And his thumb wouldn't move on to the next senator until he knew how the senator would vote. And he would say to his staff, you know, he'd send his staff out to talk to senators. And they would say, I think he's going to vote this. And Johnson would just become infuriated. He said, what good is thinking to me? I have to know. And he never lost these votes, never lost a close vote. And I thought back to, you can't make a mistake in life. That's, you know, that's part of what made Johnson what he was. So this whole thing all is one continual process to me.